The cranberry relish bubbled softly in the saucepan, sweet and tart and familiar. I stirred it slowly, not because it needed that much attention, but because it gave me something to do with my hands. The cinnamon in the air made everything feel like home, and the clove hung heavy, just the way Matthew liked it when he was young. The sunlight stretched across the counter like warm ribbon, catching on the edge of the sugar jar. I hummed along with the oldies station playing from the radio behind me. Everything felt right, but in that quiet way that also feels like something's missing. A low tension tugged in my chest. I couldn't name it, but it was there, like the hush before a storm. I reached for the measuring spoon and caught my reflection in the oven glass, smiling, focused. But my belly was tight, and not from hunger. Something was coming. I just didn't know what yet. I heard it through the pass-through, between the kitchen and dining room. His voice was low, maybe not meant to travel, but it did. "She's kind of a burden now," he said. "My grandson. The one who used to squeeze my hand at bedtime and ask for one more story, Grandma." My breath caught, but I didn't drop the spoon. I kept stirring. The cranberry relish didn't need me anymore, but I needed the motion. I didn't turn toward him. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, eyes on the bubbling fruit, ears ringing. The air felt suddenly thinner. The light is not quite so golden anymore. It was just a sentence, small, soft. But it landed heavy, like wet wool around the shoulders. I stayed very still and waited for the feeling to pass. I smiled through grace, said the prayer like always, even though my throat felt tight. Pass the rolls, offer seconds. My hands moved on their own. They laughed, joked about politics and football and Aunt Clara's pie. I laughed too high, too quickly. My chest aches like I'd been holding my breath for hours. I kept wondering, did they all feel that way? Did they agree with what he said? I chewed a bite of stuffing, same recipe I've made for 30 years. It tasted like paste. I sipped water to wash it down and tried not to let my face show the hollow. My eyes stayed dry, but my heart felt swollen. Watched the steam rise from the mashed potatoes and noticed how none of it reached me. The food was perfect, every bite seasoned, the turkey tender, but I was empty. Like I was watching them from behind glass. They passed plates, told stories, and laughed loudly. Not unkind, just unaware. No one asked why I was quiet. Maybe they noticed. Maybe they didn't want to. That kind of loneliness. It's not sharp. It's slow, gentle even. It creeps behind your ribs and settles in, like something you lost but forgot to grieve. I took another bite, then stopped. I wasn't hungry anymore, not for food. The pie was sliced, the coffee poured, and still. I felt strangely calm, numb almost. The kind of calm that comes after you've accepted something you didn't want to know. I looked around the table at all the people I'd held, fed, cheered for, prayed over. And suddenly, I couldn't find my place among them. I'd raised Matthew, in this very kitchen, taught him how to crack eggs and measure flour. This house, our house, had always been warm because I kept it that way. But somehow, I had faded. I became someone they served out of obligation, not love. And I knew they didn't mean harm. Not really. That's the part that hurt the most. Placed my fork down gently, folded my napkin, and stood. "I think I'll go lie down," I said. No one stopped me. The pie wasn't even cool yet. The floor would creak in different places, and I knew who it was by the sound. Matthew always ran. Full speed, no socks, each step loud and sharp, like he was chasing something just out of reach. Sarah walked light, but fast, purposeful little stomps. And Annie, the baby, shuffled in those oversized footy pajamas, dragging one leg behind the other like she was too sleepy to lift both feet. I'd stand at the stove, half asleep, flipping pancakes with a spatula in one hand and holding a peanut butter sandwich closed with the other. The window would glow, with just the softest light, and the radio would play something soft, Sam Cooke or the Bee Gees, depending on the day. The batter sizzled on the griddle, and behind me, little feet filled the kitchen with noise that only a mother could find musical. It was chaos, hairbrushes missing, one shoe found, one note. Someone is always crying because someone else got the last banana. But it was joyful, pure and exhausting and sweet. I didn't need quiet. I needed them. I knew them by sound, by rhythm. The floorboards still remember, and if I listen hard enough, I think I still do too. It's funny what you remember most, not the birthdays or the vacations. For me, it's the feeling of my hands, cracked from scrubbing, always smelling like soap, lemon mostly. Between the cleaning job during the day, the diner in the afternoon, and the motel laundry overnight, my hands rarely rested. Neither did I. By the time I came home, it was often dark. The house would be quiet, the kids already tucked in, their soft breathing echoing down the hall. I'd pass the laundry basket piled high with socks that didn't match, shirts with spaghetti stains, towels that never dried fast enough. The hallway would smell like pine sol and whatever was left of the day's dinner. I'd put a hand on the wall sometimes, just to feel something steady, just to remind myself the house was still there, still ours. It didn't sparkle, but it held. I didn't have much to give, but I gave it everything I had. And somehow, it stayed together. Not because it was easy, but because I refused to let it fall apart. There's something about cinnamon. It reaches the corners of a house in a way no other smell can. I didn't bake because we had extra. Lord knows we didn't. I baked because that smell made the whole place feel warmer, like hope rising in the oven. Cinnamon rolls were the kids' favorite. I'd make the dough by hand on Saturday nights, even if I came home late from the diner. Sometimes I'd set the alarm just to get up and let them rise properly. The oven would fog up the windows, and I'd wipe them with my sleeve to peek out at the street, just in time to see the sun beginning to touch the neighbor's fence. 1. Morning, I caught Matthew sneaking one, barefoot, pajamas crooked, sugar already on his mouth. He looked at me like he'd been caught stealing gold, but he grinned anyway. No shame, just joy, and I let him have it. That smile was worth more than any rule I could have kept. I used to keep an old coffee can at the back of the pantry. Not one of the pretty ones, just the kind with the paper label peeling off. Every time I got paid, I'd put a little something in. Sometimes coins, sometimes a $5 bill if I hadn't had to buy new shoes that week. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was hope scraped together shift by shift. I didn't touch it for birthdays or school clothes, no matter how tight things got. That can was sacred. It was for college. It was for Matthew to walk across a stage and shake someone's hand while I clapped so hard my arms ached. Late at night, after the dishes were done and the hallway was dark, I'd sneak into the pantry. I'd twist off the lid, hear that faint clink of metal against metal, and I'd smile. I couldn't give them much, but I was going to give them that. We had storms, real ones and the kind you can't see, but we never let them inside. When the power went out, we lit candles and made it an adventure. We played shadow games on the wall and sang songs off-key. Matthew would always pretend to be scared just to crawl in my lap. I pretended not to know. Gifts were small, homemade, second-hand, sometimes just folded notes with promises I couldn't always keep. But we made it work. We laughed over beans and rice like it was steak. I made soup with whatever was in the cupboard, and the kids would act like it was a feast. I patched my knees in jeans with whatever fabric I could find, told bedtime stories I made up on the spot, and I prayed, soft and steady, over every plate, every pillow. That house wasn't fancy, but it held love in the walls. The kind you can't measure in square feet. I came home from the late shift, feet aching, apron stained with coffee and pie filling. The kids were already asleep. The hallway light was still on, like it always was when I worked past 10. I stepped into my room and saw something on my pillow, a crayon drawing, folded in half. I opened it gently, hands still smelling like bleach and dish soap. It was a picture of me, cape and all, with messy red scribbles behind me like fire. At the top, it said, "My mom is like Wonder Woman." I sat on the edge of the bed, stared at it, and felt something swell in my chest I hadn't felt in weeks. I didn't cry. I was too tired. But I tucked it into my wallet the next morning, and it stayed there for years, through rent increases and missed birthdays and everything that came. After, they see us even when we think they don't, and sometimes they see the truth clearer than we ever can. The kettle began to rattle, soft and steady. I stood by the stove, watching the steam curl toward the ceiling like breath in cold air. The scent of chamomile rose around us, calming maybe, but it didn't reach my chest. He was sitting at the table behind me, not fidgeting, not speaking. I reached up, took the kettle off the burner, and held it still. Then I asked, quiet and plain, just like folding a napkin, "Do you think I'm a burden too?" The words hung there. He didn't answer, just looked down at his shoes. That kind of silence doesn't come from not knowing. It comes from not wanting to say it aloud. I heard the truth in the stillness. My throat went dry, but I nodded like I understood, like I'd expected it. The silence wrapped around the room, thick as fog. I didn't stir the tea, I didn't move at all. I set the 2 teacups down gently, one in front of him, one in front of me. He didn't lift his eyes, just said, "Mom, you've done enough." I froze for a moment, hands still on the cup, feeling the warmth against my palms. It sounded like kindness, I suppose, like a pat on the back after a long day, but that's not how it landed. It felt like a quiet nudge off the stage. Like I'd been useful once, but no longer needed. My hands stayed steady, but my heart? It curled in on itself, like paper left near a flame. He didn't look up, and I didn't ask him to. The sun had dipped lower. The kitchen dimmed around us, long shadows stretching across the table like they were reaching for something too. I just nodded, and the tea sat there, untouched. The envelope had been sitting there for days, wedged under the knitting basket. I'd moved it twice, dusted around it, but I hadn't opened it. That night, I picked it up like it might hurt me. The edges were crisp, too new, too glossy. A brochure for Maple Pines Assisted Living. It even sounded gentle. I opened it, slowly. Pictures of a smiling old woman arranging flowers, clean sheets, a library with wide windows. I slid it across the table toward him, watching his eyes as it moved. He didn't blink. Didn't hesitate. "Maybe that's best," he said, and something pulled inside me. Not sharp, just distant. Like a thread snapping at the hem of a favorite dress. The house felt it too. I swear the walls shifted just slightly. The ceiling fan hummed louder than it should have. My knitting needles, still in my lap, tapped together with a click that felt too loud. I looked at the brochure again, and I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. There was no fight, no shouting, just that steady kind of stillness that tells you something important has gone missing. I nodded, like I was agreeing. But really, I was letting go of something. I don't know what exactly. Maybe the version of me that still hoped to be needed. He stood, muttered something about getting back to work, and walked out of the room. The heater kicked on with a long groan just after the door clicked shut. It made the silence feel even heavier. I stayed where I was. It wasn't a dramatic slam. Nothing slammed. But something did close, not with noise, but with finality, a kind of quiet that sealed things in. I picked up my knitting needles, tried to start a row, but I couldn't remember where I'd left off. My fingers trembled, just slightly. The wind brushed the window. The house didn't creak. It held its breath with me. The tea I had poured earlier sat untouched. The surface no longer steamed. The warmth was long gone. He had left without saying goodbye. Just a soft, "all right," as he passed the threshold. No hug, no glance back. I sat still, half a row of knitting loose in my lap. My fingers rested against the yarn, but I didn't move. The only sound was the soft whistle of the wind through the chimney and the low tick of the kitchen clock. The chair across from me felt colder than the tea. I stared at it for a while. Not angry, just hollow. When did I become scheduled to be relocated, not out of cruelty, but convenience? I used to be the fire in this house, the one who kept it warm, and now I felt like a flickering pilot light, still here but dimmed. I didn't cry. I just sat there, listening to the silence. Holding the last stitch that never got finished, I opened the top drawer with slow fingers. The wood stuck a little, like it hadn't been used in a while. Inside, nestled beneath folded scarves and a few church bulletins, was the pale blue blouse I used to wear every Easter. The same one I wore the morning Matthew finally tied his shoes by himself, laces uneven but proud. The scent of lavender sachet drifted up, faint but loyal. My fingers paused over the fabric. It felt thinner now, delicate, like memory. I held it to my chest for a moment, then laid it on the bed and began folding. Not just fabric. Years. I didn't cry. But my hands moved slower than usual, smoothing. Every crease like it meant something. I placed the blouse in the donation box with care, as if it could feel like a goodbye. The room dimmed with winter twilight, and the silence pressed in, soft as wool. I heard him walking in the hallway, heavy, steady steps. He had the same gait he did as a boy, just heavier now, filled with grown man weight and a silence I couldn't break. But his steps never came toward my door. He walked past, into the guest room, then the garage, then back again. I waited, sat, on the edge of my bed with a box half packed, hands resting in my lap. Just one knock would have done it. Just one, but it didn't come. All I heard were drawers opening and closing, boxes being shifted, a cough, then more silence. That hallway used to be filled with giggles and, "Mom, look at this!" Now it echoed, and somehow the house felt bigger, like it had stretched just to hold the space between us. He sat curled into the corner of the couch, face glowing from the light of his phone. His thumbs moved fast, tapping out messages, swiping past something I'll never know. The TV murmured something about the weather. Cardboard boxes stood around the room like polite strangers waiting for instructions. I stood nearby, holding a photo album, ready to ask, "Do you remember this one?" But he didn't look up. I wanted to ask if he remembered the warm milk with honey. The story is about the dragon with a lisp, how he used to crawl into my lap with his teddy bear and say, "Don't stop, Grandma." But I stayed quiet. In that moment, I realized I was a stranger in this home, the one I'd painted, cleaned, prayed in, the one I'd built with tired hands and late-night casseroles, and the boy who once called me his favorite person didn't even look up. I sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes that seemed too clean for what they held. Sweaters, lined up and sealed. Photo albums, each one wrapped in plastic. My favorite mixing bowls, their edges chipped just enough to remember every birthday cake. I labeled everything with black marker, sweaters, photos, kitchen, but not one box said heartbreak. Not one said letting go. I picked up the pie dish, ceramic, off-white, a little cracked at the rim. I'd made Matthew's favorite cherry pie in it every year for his birthday. He used to ask for whipped cream, extra high. Now I held it, like it was just an object, not the witness of so many wishes blown out, so many candles melted too far into the crust. I wrapped it in paper, wrote kitchen, fragile across the side. I didn't write what I really meant. This is all I have left. The lamp flickered softly. Cardboard and lavender filled the air, and somewhere behind it all, the old clock ticked on, unbothered. I stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, sweater pulled tight. The walls looked the same, but something had changed. The sunlight outlines from old picture frames still clung to the paint, like ghosts. I ran my fingers across one of them, and it felt like a touching absence. 38 years in this house. Brought babies home to these rooms. Burned my first Thanksgiving turkey in this very oven. Matthew took his first steps down that hallway. I could still hear the echo if I let myself, but now I felt like a guest. The boxes were packed, the furniture cleared, the corners swept too clean. Even the heater's soft rattle didn't soothe like it used to. It just sounded like a reminder. Time had passed, and I wasn't needed here anymore. I pulled the blanket up to my chin that night. It smelled like detergent, not me. The sheets were stiff, the pillow was too firm. I closed my eyes and tried not to remember the warmth that used to live in these walls. The house didn't say goodbye, but it didn't ask me to stay either. Nora's kitchen always smelled like cinnamon and memory. We sat across from each other, steam rising from our mugs in lazy spirals. Her toast sat cooling on the plate, butter melting into the crust. She reached for her coffee, her fingers worn but sure, and said softly, "You still have the deed, you know." I blinked. "What?" She looked right at me, sharp as ever. "The house. It's yours. You own it." The words hit like a warm weight in the chest. I had forgotten. Forgotten what it felt like to own something, not just bricks and a front porch, but the right to decide where I belong. I stirred my coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. "I didn't think I could still—" "You can," she said simply. I nodded, heart rising with the steam between us, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like something was mine again. The wind snapped at my coat as I stepped out of the car. I pulled my gloves tighter, breath rising in little white puffs. The streets downtown were quieter than I remembered. Empty sidewalk cafes, early shadows stretching from tall buildings. But I didn't feel small. Not today. Each step toward the lawyer's office felt like I was reclaiming something, not loudly, not angrily, just firmly. The stone steps were slick, the railing cold under my hand. My heels clicked softly against the pavement like punctuation. I could have turned around. I had, so many times before, in smaller ways, but not this time. The wind bit at my cheeks, but it didn't slow me. It sharpened me. It reminded me that sometimes, even when everything feels out of your hands, you can still decide to walk forward. And that's exactly what I did. The moment I stepped inside, I could smell it. Lemon oil, leather, a faint trace of old paper. The waiting room hadn't changed in decades. Same green chairs with their squeaky cushions. Same grandfather clock ticking softly in the corner. It was like stepping into a room that remembered me. Mr. Halperin appeared from the back. He hadn't changed much either. White hair a little thinner, smile just as gentle. "Well, if it isn't Miss Eloise," he said, holding the door to his office open. I sat down slowly, my hands trembling just a little. He didn't rush me, didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. He just waited, kind eyes watching without pressure. That kind of patience, the quiet kind, it makes the difference. I took a breath and nodded. "Let's go over the papers." And just like that, the ache in my chest loosened, if only a little. My name sat at the bottom of the page, printed in clear, clean letters. Not a relic, not a memory, a signature line. I stared at it for a moment, feeling something shift inside me. Not nostalgia. This wasn't about the past. This was authority, ownership. I remembered the first time I signed a mortgage paper. 29, nervous, holding Matthew in one arm and a ballpoint pen in the other. Back then, it felt like stepping into a storm. Now it felt like planting my feet. I picked up the pen. The chair creaked gently beneath me. Mr. Halperin said nothing, just slid the papers forward. I signed once, twice. Each stroke is steady. When I was done, I closed the folder gently and looked up. "That's it?" "That's it," he said, smiling. I nodded, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt solid. Not floating, not waiting for permission. Just here. Outside, the air hadn't warmed. The wind still had bite, and my coat still didn't quite cover my neck. But as I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the folder in my tote felt heavier than the weather, not because of paper, because of what it meant. That house was still mine. I didn't know what I'd do with it. Yet, whether I'd go back, sell it, fix it, or live in it forever. But for the first time in a long while, I could do something, and that was enough. I pulled my scarf tighter, nodded to no one in particular, and walked into the wind, not away from anything, but towards something. Something that felt like mine. The room was neat. Too neat. The bed had sharp corners like someone had ironed the blankets into obedience. The dresser matched the side table. The lamp gave off a quiet hum, and the walls were beige, calm, safe, forgettable. It felt like a hotel room where someone else had decided how you should sleep and what you should need. I sat on the edge of the mattress, the sheets tucked too tightly to pull loose without effort. My hands rested in my lap. The scent in the air was something floral, but too clean, like petals that had been dipped in bleach. I looked around, trying to find something that recognized me. A photo, a knick-knack, anything, but nothing in that room had ever known my voice, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I didn't belong, not even to the space I was meant to call home. The tray came early, like it always did. Oatmeal, lukewarm and polite, decaf in a white mug that matched every other one on the floor. I stirred the sugar in quietly, wishing it tasted like anything. What I missed, what I couldn't stop thinking about, was my chipped blue mug. The one Matthew painted in 3rd grade, with uneven stripes and the word Mom in shaky red. It used to sit right by the sink at home, waiting for me every morning like a faithful old dog. Here, the mugs were all the same. And when I lifted one to my lips, it felt like sipping from someone else's memory. It's strange how much you can lose in a little thing like a mug. That was mine. This one wasn't. And in that moment, I felt just a little more erased. They were sweet, the nurses, truly. They brought my tray with a smile, called me Han, and remembered that I liked extra butter on my toast. But they didn't know me. Not really. They didn't know I cried every time Beth died in Little Women. They didn't know I hated olives, that I liked my toast barely browned, that I used to hum when I cleaned, or that I'd once danced barefoot in the kitchen just to make my daughter laugh. They were kind, but their kindness floated on the surface. It never touched the roots, and I smiled back, because what else could I do? But inside, it hurt. To be taken care of, but not truly known. It's a lonelier feeling than being alone. I waited until the halls grew still, and the lights dimmed down to slivers of gold under the door. That's when the tears came. Not loud. Not messy, just quiet, steady drops that slipped past the edge of my control. I didn't sob. I didn't shake. I just turned my face to the wall, pulled the blanket to my chin, and let myself feel it, slow and soft. I clutched the corner of the blanket like it might hold me up. It didn't, and I missed the sound of wind through the curtains at home. The way it used to rustle them gently while I drifted off, the air fresh and real. Here, the silence was too still, too sterile, and I cried the kind of tears you hope no one ever hears, because they don't come from sadness alone. They come from being forgotten. Every morning, I smoothed the bedspread just right, folded the top edge down, fluffed the pillow. I lined up my slippers at the foot of the bed, toes facing out, ready to step. It made me feel like I still had somewhere to go. "This isn't forever," I whispered, just loud enough for myself. But As the days passed, the calendar stayed blank. No circled dates, no notes. Just a smiling puppy, wearing sunglasses and a stretch of white space. And that lie, "This is temporary," grew heavier every morning. I stared out at the view that never changed. And I waited. The knock was soft, almost hesitant, like someone unsure if they should be there. I wasn't expecting anyone. Sundays had been quiet lately, just me and the sound of the wind through the blinds. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and shuffled to the door. When I opened it, there she was, Melissa. All grown up now, but still with that same warm-eyed look she had when she used to roller skate past my porch in pigtails. She held out a pie, steam still curling from the crust. Cherry by the smell of it. "I baked too much," she said, with a sheepish smile. Something in me fluttered, like curtains caught in a spring breeze. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Well," I said, my voice catching in my throat, "come on in then." And just like that, something cracked open. A soft place in me I thought had gone quiet. She set the pie on the counter and looked around like the room held pieces of her childhood. "I used to love your porch," she said, running her fingers along the chair rail. "You always had muffins on Sundays." I chuckled. "Those were from a box mix, you know." "Didn't matter," she smiled. "They felt homemade." Then she paused, softened. "You once tucked my scarf in real tight on a freezing morning. I never told you how much that meant." Her words landed gently, like a stitch pulling fabric back together. They pulled me back into the neighborhood story, into the memory of being part of something, not just surviving somewhere. I wasn't just a woman in a chair anymore. I was someone whose hands had made warmth, and someone had remembered. We sat across from each other at the table, pie between us. She didn't ask me to speak. She didn't try to fill the silence with chatter. She just waited, her eyes kind and open. So I talked. About Matthew's obsession with frogs when he was 8. About Christmas the power went out and we used candles and it felt like magic. About the way my husband used to sing off key just to make me laugh. She laughed too, not politely, but with her whole face. The kind of laugh that says, "I'm not doing this to be nice. I'm doing this because I feel it." And I kept talking, because for the first time in a long while, someone was truly listening. No clock watching, no glazed over eyes, just presence, and it felt like being seen. The pie was lovely, flaky, sweet, with just enough tart. But it wasn't the taste that filled me. It was the giving, slicing the pie, placing it on her plate, watching her enjoy it like it meant something. I hadn't baked it, hadn't grown. The cherries hadn't done anything to create it, but still, I got to offer it. And she let me. It reminded me that presence, too, is a kind of nourishment. That sometimes love isn't in the thing you bring. It's in the sitting, the noticing, the sharing. She asked for a second piece. I smiled and cut another slice. She said, "Thank you." I said, "For what?" And she just said, "For being you." And I held that moment close, like something warm cupped in my hands. After she left, I stood at the sink and looked out the window as the sky turned to gold. The last slice of pie sat on the counter, wrapped in foil. I thought about saving it for later, but just knowing it was there felt like enough. The curtains danced a little in the breeze, the room still carrying the scent of sugar and something else, something light and real. I sat down and placed my hands flat on the table. I didn't feel forgotten anymore, but more than that, I remembered myself. I remembered the girl who made cinnamon toast for 3 sleepy kids, the woman who kept extra mittens in the drawer for neighborhood children, the mother, the friend, the neighbor, the nurturer. I was still all of those things, not just in memory, but in the marrow of who I am. And as the light faded, I smiled. It stayed longer than the conversation did. The key slid in like it always had, smooth, sure, as if no time had passed. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the knob, just listening. The street behind me was quiet, save for the soft rustle of cherry blossoms falling in the breeze. The doormat was still there, crooked like always, with a bit of leaf stuck in the corner. I turned the knob gently. The door didn't creak this time. Inside, the air was still. Not stale, but waiting. No voices, no footsteps, just the hush of a space holding its breath. I stepped across the threshold slowly, like I didn't want to startle the memory of it. Like I was coming home to something more than a house. I was coming home to myself. I walked through the hallway, each footstep soft against the hardwood. It echoed, yes, but not like emptiness. More like memory calling back. The banister met my palm like an old friend. I traced it lightly, passing the little nick Matthew made when he slid down too fast in his socks. I touched the light switch that always flickered, and the dent in the kitchen wall from a flying tennis ball he swore he didn't mean to throw. The golden light poured in through the west windows, stretching across the floor in long, warm lines. I followed them room to room, letting my fingers brush across tables, door frames, windowsills. There was dust, yes, but also lemon polish in the corners of the cabinet doors. That house hadn't forgotten me, and now I wasn't just remembering it, I was remembering me. I walked from room to room, unlocking windows like lifting the lid on a music box. The air that rushed in wasn't fresh, it was sharp with dust, full of spring pollen and something else, relief. The curtains fluttered like hands reaching out. Light spilled in, touched everything. The floor, the walls, my cheeks. I moved slowly, lifting the sash on the big living room window. It stuck at first, then gave with a little groan. The breeze rolled in fast and cool, carrying the scent of cherry blossoms from the front yard. Dust motes lifted into the beams of sun like tiny floating stars. I stood there in the middle of the room, palms open at my sides. It felt like the house was breathing again, and for the first time in a long while, so was I. There were no shoes by the door. No half-folded laundry on the couch, no cereal boxes lined up on the counter like little soldiers. But it didn't feel empty. It felt cleared. The pantry door was slightly ajar, and I could still see the faint marks on the walls where the picture frames had hung. The echo of lives lived here didn't haunt. It softened. I walked into the den and listened for something. Anger, grief, that pang of loss I had feared. But it wasn't there. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Like the house had let out a long breath, and I could finally hear its exhale. Like it wasn't mourning their absence, it was welcoming my return, and I didn't feel left behind. I felt reclaimed. I didn't rush. I walked slowly and steadily, as if my feet already knew the route. There were no questions inside me, no wondering where I fit, whether I belonged. That chair in the corner, the one they never used, called to me. I sank into it with a soft sigh, letting the cushion remember the shape of me. The window beside me was open, the breeze carrying in the soft scent of lilacs from the bush out front. The walls, once crowded with noise, now held a warm kind of stillness. Evening light poured across the rug, casting golden ribbons that stretched all the way to my toes. My fingers rested on the armrest. My breath slowed. I didn't need to prove anything. Didn't need to be useful, or needed, or even noticed. I was here, not as a visitor, not as a shadow of the past, but as the woman who had built this home and returned to herself fully. I heard the knock before the porch light flicked on. Just 3. Soft taps, slow, unsure, like someone not certain they were still welcome. I stood still in the hallway, hand paused on the doorknob, listening. I knew it was Matthew. There was a shift in the air, a hush I recognized. the kind that used to fall over the house when he came home from college break and didn't quite know how to say hello. I opened the door, and there he was. Taller than I remembered somehow, shoulders rounded by something more than age. He held a box of tools, not big, just enough to make it look like a reason. "Thought I'd check the hinges," he said, eyes not quite meeting mine. My hands didn't shake, but my chest did, just a little on the inside. I stepped aside and nodded. "All right." The wind brushed the window behind me, the door creaked open like a sigh, and he stepped back into the house like it wasn't too late. We didn't speak at first. He walked from room to room, tools in hand, checking outlets and hinges like he used to when he still called this place home. I followed, quiet as breath. He touched the doorframe in the living room, ran his fingers along a chipped edge. No comment. Just the faintest look of recognition, like he knew the house still held his fingerprints. The floor creaked under our steps, familiar and forgiving. He moved through the kitchen, tested the faucet, jiggled a loose drawer he'd once broken trying. To sneak snacks as a boy. He didn't have to explain why he was there, and I didn't ask. There was something soft in the way he reached for the light switch. Something slow in how he opened each cabinet door. Guilt, maybe. Or maybe just memory. Either way, I saw it, and I let the silence carry what didn't need to be said aloud. We stood in the kitchen, hands resting on opposite sides of the counter. The overhead light cast a soft golden wash across the room, and the old radiator hissed below the window like it was exhaling for us. He looked at the table, not at me. "You were always the strong one," he said. No big lead-up, no dramatic pause. Just those words, quiet, truthful. And it landed, not like a blow, but like a blanket laid gently across an old bruise. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just let it settle. He looked up then, just for a second. His eyes carried something. Heavy but no defenses, and I didn't rush to forgive. I didn't pretend it didn't hurt. I just let the moment live. We stood in it together, both of us facing the weight between us, not with anger, but with a kind of shared quiet. And in that quiet, I finally felt heard. I turned to the cabinet, pulled down 2 mugs, one with a chip in the handle, the other still stained from years of use. He sat down at the kitchen table like he used to, elbows off the edge, hands folded. I poured the coffee without a word, the pot gurgling softly in the background. When I slid his mug across the table, he reached out with both hands, held it like it mattered. We didn't clink glasses, didn't toast to anything. We just sat, letting the steam curl between us, saying the things we couldn't quite bring ourselves to speak. He sipped first. I followed. It wasn't about the coffee. It never is. It was the act of it, of sharing something again, of doing what mothers do, offer, give, hold space. And for once, he let me. We stayed there, just sitting. The coffee went down slowly. The clock ticked somewhere behind us. Outside, the sky turned a shade of lavender I hadn't noticed in years. He didn't apologize. I didn't ask him to. I looked at his face, not the man who forgot me, but the boy who once left crayon drawings under my pillow and asked me to keep them forever. His jaw was tighter now. His hands were more worn, but his presence felt familiar again. We didn't need to talk it through. We just needed to be in it. The room glowed with the last light of the day, and in that quiet, something between us softened. We weren't fixing anything. We were just finally in the same room again. The coffee had cooled, untouched for a while now. We were both still in our chairs, not leaning forward, not pulling away. Just being. Together. The lamp cast soft halos across the floor, and the rest of the house was still. Like it understood something had finally shifted, not everything was healed. That kind of repair takes longer than one evening, but I felt the Thread between us stretch out, then pull taut, then settle into a knot. Not perfect, but strong. Forgiveness isn't a doorway, it's a chair. One you sit in, even when it's still hard, even when you don't know what to say next. And that night, we sat in it. No demands, no apologies wrapped in fear, just a mother. And a son, quietly paying off the cost of too many years unsaid, and starting at last to balance the account. The pen felt solid in my hand, not heavy. Not angry, just certain. I didn't write anything with fire in my chest. That had burned out long ago. What was left was calm, the kind that comes only when you've made peace with your decision. The window was open beside me, and the garden. Air floated in, soft and alive. I could smell the lilacs and the soil Matthew used to dig through when he was 7, looking for treasure. My tea's gone cold, but I didn't mind. The papers were spread neatly in front of me. No drama, no ceremony. Just the truth. I changed my mind, signed it with the same name I once wrote on field trip forms and mortgage checks. The breeze lifted the corner of the last page as if nodding in quiet approval. I didn't take anything away. I simply gave something, where it was needed, when the time was right. This house was never grand. Never needed to be. It was strong in its softness. Worn wood, mismatched mugs, quilts folded at the end of every bed. The power in it was never in appearances. It was in the way it held people, quietly, steadily. I thought about the women who would walk through it next, some unsure, some starting over, some holding babies close to their chests, looking for a place that wouldn't ask questions. I smiled, thinking of them opening these same windows I just reopened. Of them baking bread in the same oven that burned my first meatloaf. Of them finding peace on this porch, like I once did. They wouldn't know me. Not really. But maybe they'd feel me in the way the kitchen wraps around you when the kettle sings. Or in the daffodils growing stubbornly through the mulch out back. This house didn't need to impress. It just needed to keep them safe. I didn't want to teach them a lesson. That kind of thing fades too fast. What I wanted was to leave them something. They could hold long after the sharpness wore off. Not money, not bitterness. Me. The quilt I made when Matthew was born, stitched with tired fingers and hope. The cornbread recipe card, smudged in the corner, written in my careful handwriting. The journals I kept through long nights, tucked in the drawer where the flashlight used to be, waiting for small hands during thunderstorms. I didn't want them to feel punished by what I left behind. I wanted them to learn something when they were ready, maybe when they wrapped the quilt around themselves on a cold morning, or pulled out that recipe just to see if it still worked, or opened the journal and saw the way my thoughts stumbled and stood back up again. I left what mattered, quietly, and not to make a point, to leave a piece of myself behind, not the anger, not the hurt, just the love that remained underneath it. All I left a note, tucked into a corner of the counter under the edge of the sugar jar. I didn't fold it neatly. I wanted it to look like a thought, not a performance. It said, "You are not a burden if you still have love to give." That's it. No love, Mom, no signature, just the words. They might roll their eyes when they see it, or miss it completely the first time. But maybe one day, when the house is quiet and the air smells a little like lilac, they'll find it. Maybe they'll pause, read it again, and maybe it will mean something. I hope their hearts will be quieter then, older, softer. I hope they'll sit at this same table with a cold cup of tea and hear my voice in their chest. I hope they'll know I meant it, because I always did. The porch creaked gently beneath me as I rocked back and forth, shawl tucked around my shoulders. I knitted it years ago, on stormy nights when money was tight and the lights flickered and all I had was time and yarn and hope. The sky was lavender now, that soft, late hue that seems to arrive just when the world needs quiet. I didn't need to hold anything anymore. Not the keys, not the house, not the ache, just the peace that came from choosing how to let go. The wind chimes above me sang low and slow, their voices dancing through the daffodils. My hands rested in my lap, open, empty, but not hollow. Inside, I had warmth, the kind you earn not from holding on, but from setting something down gently and knowing you didn't break it. I was no longer waiting to be remembered. I was remembering myself. If my story touched your heart, I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe. I'll be here every day, sharing more stories just for you. Thank you, my dear.